Tonight, the Councillor campaigning to ban the Welcome to Country. He'll say why. Peter Dutton says we need tougher laws to stop Muslim hate preachers. But is yet another law against free speech really smart? Also tonight, calls for the Albanese government to end a war on our waterfront that's hurting the country. And why exactly are we paying for a Minister for the Republic when he tells us it's not actually planning to do much? But first, the Prime Minister should be thrilled. Climate Change Minister Christou should be throwing a party at Parliament House because today 1,000 Australians were told they're out of a job. Isn't that great news? Because these are planet killers, planet killers. These are workers and contractors at Alcoa's Kwinana aluminium refinery in Western Australia. They've just been told their plant is closing. Not profitable, they've been told, even though prices for aluminium are still historically high. Now, I know the Labor Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook, was putting on a sad face today. Well, he is the local member.
My heart goes out to them, and I want them to know that my government will do everything that it can to make sure that we stand by those workers, ensuring that they have other opportunities to work in other parts of Alcoa, but also where they need to be reskilled, get good advice and training, that my government stands ready to assist them all.
Yeah, maybe they could go and polish all those blades on wind farms or something, Sure. Spare us. In fact, Cook's government and Labor governments everywhere claim global warming is such a threat that tiny Australia should be slashing its emissions to net zero by 2050 to supposedly stop it. And its Labor has been warned since for at least 13 years. This means aluminium smelters will be among the first industries to go because they use so much electricity, huge amounts of it, mostly made by coal and gas. You couldn't run these things on wind. And look, of course, what's happened to power prices. So, who's going to gain from this? China. China's not cutting its own emissions. That's just for us suckers in the West. And China's now, of course, the world's biggest supplier of aluminium, setting new production records last year. How mad is this? We've got so much coal and gas and oil and bauxite, all the ingredients you want for making aluminium, but our politicians now make it too hard for this smelter to stay in business. Just 2 months ago, you had Tim Flannery, the professional global warming alarmist, another environmentalist, demanding Alcoa stop digging out cheap bauxite near the Serpentine Dam. Also last year, Rio, which runs its own smelters here, has had to write off more than $1 billion from the value of them because of the Albanese government's new plan to force them to slash emissions at huge cost. So, spare me any Labor tears as a smelter bites the dust and workers lose their jobs, because this is exactly what's meant to happen with our global warming policies. You've got to ask what the left is actually doing to this country. Where has reason gone? I reckon fried to ashes by the great global warming scare. Because I'll give you another example from today. These floods in Victoria. To me, they tell us that maybe the Bureau of Meteorology doesn't understand the climate quite well enough to preach about global warming, how it will ruin us if we don't cut emissions until it bleeds. Remember in 2007, for instance, how the Bureau's top global warming expert said, well, global warming actually meant less water, not more. He declared back then, climate change here is now running so rampant that we don't need meteorological data to see it. Almost every one of our cities is on the verge of running out of water, and our largest irrigation system, the Murray-Darling Basin, is on the verge of collapse. You couldn't get more wrong. Have a look now. But last September, the Bureau was at it again, telling us this would be a dry summer thanks to an El Nino. It said we'd get warmer and drier than average conditions. They were likely across most of southern and eastern Australia from October to December. Instead, we got more water than we know what to do with now. Just check the graphic put together last week by the Weekly Times. Excellent paper. Blue is above average rainfall for the towns on this map, and as you can see, it was wetter than average throughout Victoria and the Murray-Darling Basin, plus in central and northern Queensland. Yet our politicians still keep babbling about global warming. Here is Victoria's Emergency Services Minister today, blaming it for these floods.
Well, there's no doubt that we need to be responding to climate change. We need to be looking at innovation and advice about mitigation for future events, because unfortunately, I've only been in this role less than 3 years and emergencies are pretty frequent.
Honestly, these politicians have got the global warming monster on the brain. They see it everywhere. It's dry, global warming. It's wet, global warming. So let's shut another smelter, shall we? I mean, that minister's just making things up. In fact, even the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which actually writes the Bible on global warming, said in its latest report, well, actually, we have low confidence that we're getting heavy rain and river floods because of global warming. And when you check the Bureau of Meteorology's rainfall records for Victoria, you'll see we've still got a bit to go to match up to the big rains we got in the middle of last century. But back to this minister, in fact, to all Labor and Green MPs and too many Liberal ones too. If global warming really did mean more rain for Australia, isn't that actually a fantastic thing? Fantastic for such a dry continent. Isn't more rain exactly what we need so that we have water and food for the hundreds of thousands of immigrants we take in each year? Why on earth would our politicians fight global warming if they really think it brings us more water? They want it drier? Seriously? Honestly, Australia's fast becoming a second-rate country because of stupidity like this. Politicians complaining if we get more rain, causing industries to close in a mad bid to stop it. I mean, enough, right? End this unreason before this country gets even poorer. Joining me is Nationals MP Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister. Matt, great to have you back for this year ahead of us. Where is the Climate Change Minister, Chris Bowen, today? You know, I thought he'd be out there celebrating, popping champagne corks because one of the country's biggest electricity users is closing. One of the biggest sources of our emissions is gone.
Well, he probably is enjoying a quiet glass of champagne or some such somewhere on a beach, probably somewhere at the moment, Andrew, because it's exactly what he wants to do. It's exactly his plan. As you say, this will, in and of itself, lower Australia's carbon emissions, which we seem obsessed about. It won't, of course, lower the world's carbon emissions because we'll continue to use aluminium products that are made from alumina, the refinery that's shutting today. And it's just going to come from China, those products. It's going to come from a country probably with higher emissions. So it's not going to lower emissions. It might even make it worse. And this decision today just shows up the absolute folly of our net zero emissions obsession. The net zero policy that we have costs Australian jobs, and it doesn't reduce global carbon emissions. It doesn't even meet its objective, and it comes at a massive cost to the Australian economy. It means deindustrialisation. It means manufacturing jobs from Australia going overseas. And tonight, what we should mostly remember are those 1,000 families that face losing their jobs, facing an uncertain new year, uncertain future for them and their families. I mean, where is the so-called Labor Party here trying to fight for those jobs? It's like they just put up the white flag and are doing nothing. The last time we did see Chris Bowen, he was out there saying how terrible nuclear energy was just before Christmas and how renewables were going to save us all. Well, where is your wind and solar factories now, Chris Bowen? What do they mean for those 1,000 families that are facing no jobs in the future? And where the hell is the Australian Labor Party trying to fight for and back these manufacturing jobs that are lost tonight?
Yeah, exactly right, and the unions. Matt, but let's have a reality check. How much really are global warming policies and higher power prices to blame here, do you think? Because I read Alcoa, look, it's a very opaque little statement to put out, blames a variety of factors, including the plant's age, scale, operating costs, and current bauxite grades, plus market conditions, which could mean just about anything. Is that really the whole story?
Well, obviously, it's a very vague statement, basically blaming everything under the sun, including their operational costs, which, of course, will come back to the carbon tax that Labor has imposed on this particular refinery. But there's obviously a range of factors here. The fact is, though, that all of those factors existed before. Before, when we had this refinery going, when it was first built many decades ago, when we've got other refineries going on this side of the East Coast, we've always had high wages in Australia. It's always been a tough environment to operate in. We've always been a long way from markets. But we've been able to make it work because we've got an innovative, highly skilled workforce. We have the natural resources in bauxite close to us. So those natural advantages are being squashed now, though, because Labor did impose a carbon tax on this very refinery just 6 months ago. They introduced what they call the safeguard mechanism. It only applies to just over 200 factories all around Australia, including our alumina refineries right across Australia. And 6 months later, this factory has shut. There's the evidence. The evidence is clear. And Ian, we were told that this carbon tax would not cost jobs. There was no major detailed modelling done, though. And obviously it doesn't help when a government puts on a new tax, and this new tax gets bigger and bigger every year. This Labor tax will be higher and higher on our refineries, on our smelters, on our mines. Every year it gets bigger and bigger. And so in that environment, if you face a bit of a difficult environment in a factory and you're looking at needing to reinvest, needing to upgrade, you're probably not going to do it in a country that wants to keep slapping you higher and higher taxes. A lot easier for them, of course, to go to China, to go to other countries where they obviously will not face these kinds of imposts, not face a carbon tax, and certainly not face a government obsessed with net zero emissions.
Well, you say that. It's quite interesting that this very day, I think it was, the Australian newspaper reported that the mining industry is warning that there's a lot of investment that we're missing out on, a lot of projects that could have gone ahead that aren't. And I wonder to what extent this country is being made unfriendly to investors in those industries. Now, meanwhile, the Albanese government is signalling it might end the cap on coal prices that it put on to cut electricity prices. Now, the Treasurer today wouldn't confirm it, but did claim the cap had worked. Here he is.
We know from the ABS that electricity prices would have been much higher were it not for our combined efforts. The ABS has made it very clear that the rebates and the caps took some of the sting off these price rises.
Well, should that price cap stay or go? It's likely to go at the middle of the year if it's not renewed. And if it does go, what then?
Well, it definitely should go. It's been totally ineffective, except the only effective it has been is to strip taxpayers of $2 billion and hand it over to rich multinational coal companies. I mean, I'm a big supporter of the coal industry, but I don't think your taxpayers' dollars should just be signed over to them in almost what was almost a blank cheque from this government. We don't have a precise estimate yet. I've written to Treasury today asking for updated figures, but they have admitted that this will probably cost $1.5 to $2 billion of your money. Now, I've done some quick calculations. If it does come in at $2 billion, there are 10 million Australian households. That means that's $200 from every Australian household. And you just got to ask yourself, has your power bill gone down by $200 over the past year? That's the claim of this government. And I don't think anybody would be able to come back with an affirmative answer on that. And that then raises the question, where did this money go? Where did the money that came out of your taxpayer funds, the money that you work hard for, it's gone over to the likes of Rio Tinto, to the likes of the coal operator, the New South Wales government who owns coal-fired power stations and coal mines there. It is absolutely ridiculous, this policy, and it should never have been put in place. It's been ineffective, and I'm glad to see it go.
Now, look, I'm out of time, but I can't let this slide because I got so disappointed driving to Horsham last week. Yeah, I couldn't believe all the wind farms on the hills and rises around me, wrecking the views. Now Premier Jacinta Allan wants to turn wetlands close by my home on the Western Port Bay into an industrial facility for building offshore wind towers. And today vowed to push on with this plan, even though Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek had said no. Here she is.
The climate is changing and we have to act. That's why we have been working very hard on adding offshore wind and supporting the development of offshore wind as part of that renewable energy mix.
Honestly, Matt, I mean, now we want to save the planet by building a plant on wetlands. I mean, does this make any sense to you?
Well, I will give it to the modern green activists in the Labor Party today that they're doing the impossible. They're turning me into an environmental activist. And I might very well be sharing a stage with Bob Brown or some such very shortly, because this is absolutely absurd. I mean, there's only 67 Ramsar-listed wetlands in Australia. Big country. These are the most important wetlands in our nation. And, yeah, look, I haven't spent my political career protecting the environment. I've been busy trying to protect local jobs under the attack from the Greenies. But I am an environmentalist. I don't want to see us build coal mines over Ramsar-listed wetlands. I don't think we should build ports over Ramsar-listed wetlands, and we certainly shouldn't be supporting foreign investors in wind factories and solar factories to destroy our environment. It is absolutely absurd.
and for nothing. That's the point. Guys, people, I advise you to go and feed the wonderful pelicans down at Hastings while they're still there. Matt Canavan, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. And more trouble at mill. I mean, for 4 months now, there's been a go-slow industrial action at our ports that's held up cargo and cost the country an estimated $84 million a week. And this dispute could now go nuclear because the Maritime Workers Union, they're at war with DP World, which handles 40% of the cargo going through our ports. And this union is demanding a 16% pay rise for workers over 2 years. Isn't that great work if you can get it? They want that so they get paid around what workers with the other big operator, Patrick's, already get. DP World says it can't afford that and has said it will now dock workers' pay if they don't do their job. And the opposition is calling on the government to finally step in before this really gets out of hand.
There's been plenty of energy from the Albanese government when it's come to ramming through the parliament increased union-friendly industrial relations laws. They've been happy to give unions greater powers since they've been in government. But why are they unwilling to use government powers to try to bring to an end an industrial dispute, a strike that is going to cost our economy and cost Australians deeply?
Joining me is the Executive Vice President of DP World Oceania, Nikolai Nurse. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. The union says your workers should get paid as much as workers at Patrick's. Is that fair enough?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Andrew. And I think everyone should be paid fairly. I think when we set salaries, we don't just cherry pick from wherever industry or wherever competitors say these are the terms I want to cherry pick. Personally, I would like to be able to pick the conditions of all of my peers as well, but that's not how it works, and it's not how it should work either. In specific, for our organizations versus some of our competitors have decided to move ahead with the automation of their operation, which I would speculate means that they have a higher productivity as well in their operations, which potentially allow them to pay higher salaries. But that is, really speculation from my side.
How is this fight, meanwhile, hurting Australians?
And I think that is, a big part of where we are here today also and speaking to you, because it is about a call out from our side and saying that a dispute on the waterfront really has a significant overflow impact on Australia at large. And we have to admit that we are part of the cost of living issues and elements that we have at the moment. So when you take capacity out of the logistics chains, it is like anywhere else. You create bottlenecks, you create shortages, and you then consequently have increases in cost afterwards. And that gets passed through from importers into retailers and in the end into consumers. So that is probably also why we feel it is a different industry than many other industries, because the flow-on effect on Australia when things are not working in our industry is quite significant.
Well, particularly when so many people are already struggling with supply issues even before this happened, and to have so much held up at the docks, this is not good. Now, you say you want Prime Minister Anthony Albanese or Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke to ask the Fair Work Commission to step in and force both sides to make a deal. What response have you had from them?
We haven't heard back. I would like to think that those discussions are ongoing, both on a federal level, but also on a state level. State legislators also have the opportunity to step in and ask the Fair Work Commission to get involved and beyond just hosting a sit-down, but actually take an active role in reaching a compromise and getting a result. So at this stage, we haven't heard anything. I can appreciate that nobody in Canberra and anywhere else would like to be told what to do, but we do hope and expect that there are someone stepping back and saying there is a bigger picture here. There is an Australian picture. There is a cost of living issue. There is an issue about the branding and the competitiveness of Australia that we have to address, and that can help us as the party to come to that resolution. Yeah,
it's curious to me because the Fair Work Commission's obviously been long seen to be a little bit pro-union. And if the case is as simple as the maritime workers say, that they just want to be paid as much as Patrick's, as easy as that, you'd think they'd want to go to fair work. You want to go to fair work, the union doesn't. Why is that?
Yeah, and I'm getting in again to the speculative, Eric. I feel that the case that we are bringing forward is that when it's presented to someone who looks at it objectively and look at the terms and conditions that we are looking to offer, but also to look at the about 300 claims from the union side, and some of the, it's not beyond reluctance, it's the refusal to actually have an agreement that reflects what customers in logistics need today and what is fair and reasonable. I think that I can only speculate that there is some underlying concerns within the unions saying, well, the things that they are asking for, if that is looked at objectively and in a neutral way and saying what is fair, then their claims actually will be knocked back. And some of the requests that we have about making an agreement that's reflective of logistics in 2024, in a 24/7 economy, then that will actually be listened to.
Nikolai Nuss, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
After the break, amazing pictures. Why are so many Australians very happy to wave the Palestinian flag, but not the Australian one? And also, I'll talk to a Sydney councillor who promises to ban the divisive welcome to country rituals if enough of his team are elected. That election will be fascinating. There's a new primitivism on the left, a cult of the primitive, very fashionable. You saw that in a clip now that's going viral of New Zealand's youngest ever MP, just 21, making a first speech in Parliament. Although I wouldn't actually call it a speech, it was literally a war cry aimed at, I don't know, whites and Asians? Girl, you look a fool. Now, some of her speech was in Maori, a language even many Maori don't speak. But you see the sort of thing here as well, this contempt for Western civilization, contempt for the Western ideal of treating people as individuals instead of primitive division of people by race or tribe. And there's also that kind of embarrassment, that even hatred of the national flag that's supposed to unite us all. One national flag for us all instead of various flags now for various races. Let me show you two photos. Illustrate this. Both taken outside Melbourne's Flinders Street station. First, a pro-Palestinian protest last year. Check out how many Palestinian flags there, even though it's actually the flag of the terrorist Palestinian Liberation Organisation. Lots and lots of Australians in that crowd happy waving that flag. Contrast that with a crowd at the very same spot on Australia Day a year ago. Not a single Australian flag, although a few Aboriginal ones. It was actually an anti-Australia Day rally. Here's the same comparison for Sydney. First, the pro-Palestinian rally at the Sydney Opera House. How iconic is that? Australians waving the Palestinian flag. Now here is an Australia Day concert at the Sydney Opera House last year. No flags, except for two small Aboriginal ones. I know some people did have Australian flags there, but you can't see them here. And it's really weird, isn't it? It's like the Palestinian cause finally allows Australians of the left to finally unleash their patriotism, except it has to be for another country that few of them understand, and that's actually run by terrorists. I mean, this is suicidal. Where is that same passion for Australia, which happens to be a democracy as well as our own country? That seems to be treated as bad taste. Flying our flag, racist.
The Australian flag to me has now become, I identify that with racism. Does anyone else?
Sure there was at the ABC, but good news. There is a fight back, I sense, and one I think will grow this year. Now, Western Sydney, A councillor now promises to ban Welcome to Country ceremonies if he and enough of his supporters are elected in September. Joining me is that councillor, Steve Christou, who was Mayor of the Council for 5 years. Steve Christou, thank you so much for your time. Why do you want this ceremony banned?
Andrew, quite frankly, the Welcome to Country ceremony has become overdone, watered down, and people are sick of it being shoved down their throats. It has very little meaningful reflection for the vast majority of Australians, and that was proven, I believe, overwhelmingly when they voted no to the Voice to Parliament campaign. And especially in a local government area like Cumberland City Council, where 240,000 residents reside and 64% of them were born overseas, the feedback that we are getting is, why do we need to be welcome to a country that we helped build? And, you know, we turned Australia, a great country, into an even better country. And we feel unwelcome when we hear welcome to country, but also, no matter where you come from, whether it's Anglo roots, ethnic roots, any background, we are all equal. And that's the overwhelming driving force behind this, that resident feedback and my personal belief that we do not need to be welcome into our own country, created a two-class divide as second-class citizens.
Well, I think you couldn't have put it better. I mean, I just went to the Wimmera on a road trip with my daughter. I mentioned it yesterday. And I love calling into local history museums, usually run by volunteers. And you find the kind of people, 700 Chinese who unlocked the gold mines that formed Ararat. Chinese. A German guy, a Swiss guy, Zumstein, who founded a town in Victoria as well. The people from Britain and all that came here and unlocked the gold mines as well. And I mean, so many people, all those workers, many of them imported, that brought water to Stawell, first brought reticulated water to Stawell. I mean, so many people we owe this country to. Why single out one race? Would you also ban the endless pain then of respects to Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, when we should be paying respect to all elders of all races?
Well, you're absolutely spot on. And actually, my group, the Our Local Community Group, we actually have a little speech that we say in council, an acknowledgement, which acknowledges all the community, no matter what your background. And we make a point of getting up in council and saying that we acknowledge not only the Indigenous people of the land, but also the pioneers that came out and helped build this country, and their ethnic population that contributed to make this country even greater.
I think that's absolutely correct. Now, what's been the reaction to your proposal? Because it still sounds rather out there. I'm going to ban the Welcome to Country or the acknowledgement and all that. For many people, oh, that's racist, or they don't dare say they approve. But what's been the reaction?
Overwhelmingly, very positive feedback. I think the silent majority out there have now found their voice. They're starting to speak up and become louder and louder. People are just sick of it. There have been a few trolls online, but they're just gutless, faceless trolls. I've got a thick hide. We can take that. Yep. You're not going to let them spoil your day. We're here to represent everybody as equals, and it's been overwhelmingly very positive. And I think people just had a gutful.
Steve, I'm actually out of time, but I've got one quick question for you. You're the son of Greek refugees from Cyprus, which got torn apart by that civil war between Turkish Muslims and Greek Christians. So you know the danger of this kind of tribalism, why it's mad to actually reinvent it in this country.
Absolutely. My parents were Greek Cypriot refugees. They came to Australia when they lost their home in 1976. And, it's this kind of division that sows hatred and discontent amongst our community and Australian people. We're all equal. We want to stand shoulder to shoulder, side by side, hand in hand, with our Indigenous brothers and sisters as equals. Nothing more, nothing less.
Correct.
Everybody as equal.
Yep, this is not anti-Aboriginal at all. It is treating Aborigines as equals. And I think that is so important. It's the only way we can go together in this future. Steve Christou, all the best to you. Good luck. Thank you so much for your time. After the break, well, look, for once, the left is right. America's democracy is in danger. But it's not from Donald Trump. It's in danger from the Democrats now trying to ban him with a stupid and dangerous trick. I'll talk to Trump's former press secretary about this crazy plan. You know, there's something quite sick and sinister going on in the United States, which for most of my life has actually been praised as the world's great defender of democracy. But instead, you've now got two states there, Colorado and Maine, who knows who will follow them, who have banned voters from being able to choose Donald Trump as their candidate in this year's presidential election. They have banned from the primaries the most popular candidate in the country. And therefore, they've banned him from the election as well. Now, the Supreme Court in Colorado and separately the State Secretary in Maine, Shanna Bellows, claim that Trump is disqualified under the Constitution because they think he supposedly led an insurrection, a riot at the Capitol after the last election to stop Joe Biden from replacing him. And Bellows claims that she's actually defending democracy here by refusing to let voters decide whether they actually want Trump. And she doesn't see her own hypocrisy.
These events happened at the behest of the outgoing president and with the knowledge and support of the outgoing president. And the U.S. Constitution does not tolerate an assault on the peaceful transfer of power.
Yep, democracy means you can vote for a candidate. You can't vote for a candidate she hates but you want, and that is democracy left-wing style. Joining me as a regular in this election year is Sean Spicer, Donald Trump's first White House spokesman. Sean Spicer, glad to have you on the show tonight and for the rest of the year. The US Supreme Court is going to be hearing an appeal against the Colorado judgment in 30 days from now. That appeal's backed by Republican attorney generals from 27 states. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first, Happy New Year, Andrew. Always a pleasure to be with you. Look, I hope that it's a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling that they have no right to do this. There's several facets to just really quickly make sure your audience understands. Number one, a state can't tell the federal government what to do with respect to the eligibility to be president. Our Constitution lays it out very clearly. You have to be a natural born citizen. You have to be 35 years old. President Trump meets those qualifications. You cannot just willy-nilly add qualifications in there. What they're doing is looking at the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of our Constitution that says that no one shall be a senator nor representative nor elector who has engaged in an insurrection. Well, number one, President Trump, that's not the office that he's running for. And the framers of our Constitution were very, very clear and specific what they were trying to convey. And if they didn't list the office of president nor the office of vice president in that. Whether you agree with that or disagree, that's what's written in the Constitution. Number three, which I think is probably the most important, is that he hasn't been not only convicted of an insurrection, but he hasn't even been charged with being involved in an insurrection, nor, frankly, Andrew, has anyone in the United States with respect to January 6th been even charged with that. So how do you remove somebody for engaging in a behavior on which not only have they, nor anyone else in the entire country been charged with? So why I say 9-0 is that I really do hope that the other justices, as a matter of law, join with the 6 conservative justices and say, if you don't want to vote for Trump, don't vote for Trump. But a democracy at its core is allowing people the right to vote.
Well, I think you make a point about the law, but Sean Spicer, I reckon there's another issue here, which of course shouldn't really impinge on the thinking of judges, but still, if Trump is banned, what does that do to America?
Exactly. And that's the point, though. In a democracy, and we're a republic, but at the end of the day, we're modeled after a democracy. And the key to democracy is giving people the right to vote for someone or against somebody. And the idea of a state elected official, in this case, the Secretary of State of Maine, is not a lawyer. In the case of Colorado, it's 7 Democratic justices that have been ruled, that the appeals court ruled one way and the lower court ruled another, who are saying that he engaged in a behavior. He's never had what we call in America due process. But if you won't even let the American people vote, this is something that we chide third world countries around the world by saying that you need to have free and fair elections, allow competition to exist. And we here in America are suddenly going to ban the leading candidate of the Republican Party who has been a former president from running again, I just don't know how you turn around and look anyone else in the eye in the rest of the country, in the rest of the world, and preach to them if you can't do it yourself.
Oh, forget about what the rest of the world thinks, Sean. I mean, I'm worried about what might happen on the streets of America. I mean, you're telling half the Americans.
I agree. I think they're, look.
The guy they say in the polls, what's that going to do? Riots? What's next?
Look, I think if this were to happen, Andrew, I can't imagine how this would tear the country apart. The idea that one side is being told, we won't let you choose your candidate. And the irony, of course, is a bunch of Democrats telling people who could be on the primary ballot. This isn't even the general election ballot. This is the primary ballot, something that our courts have ruled the parties in our country have full jurisdiction over. And here is a bunch of Democrats trying to tell Republicans who they can and can't vote for in their own primary.
It's so sick. It speaks to something really malignant in the culture of the left that this sort of thing can pass muster. It just staggers me, and the hypocrisy of it too.
So can I just to remind voters, I was part of the campaign in 2015, and there was this there was this Russia hoax, this idea that we didn't win the election. That's what they said first. In 2020, when President Trump ran for re-election, the mainstream media and big tech in America banned the Hunter Biden laptop from being discussed or shared, something that we now know through polling would have changed the votes of countless thousands of people in America had they had that information that was banned from them from even sharing or seeing by big tech and the media. And here we are now in 2024, now the third at bat, if you will, is to outright ban him from the ballot. Once again, we're seeing the efforts that the left is using to ban the people that they don't like from even having an opportunity to compete.
Look, these people claim to be fighting autocracy. They are the new autocrats. I mean, it's just, it just leaves me speechless, basically.
Joe Biden has now, for the last several weeks, talked about his campaign being rooted in preserving democracy. So on the one hand, they're trying to ban President Trump from appearing on ballots, as you say, in 27 states, right? Maine, Colorado being the big ones that the court is going to decide. But even with his own party, Andrew, in Florida, they canceled the primary. They canceled it. They told people in the Democratic Party, who now have people that are running against him. Marianne Williamson is one. Representative Dean Phillips from Minnesota is another. That the people of Florida can't even cast a ballot. They canceled the primary. These people are lecturing everyone else about democracy being under attack. And whether it's in their own party or now looking forward to the general election, they are trying to prevent people from having a voice, being able to cast a vote for somebody other than their own candidate, Joe Biden. So I can't believe that the left wants to lecture us about democracy being in peril and under attack. And yet, in multiple circumstances, not allowing people to actually have the right to vote.
It's just extraordinary. Just quickly, Sean Spicer, meanwhile, we do have the primaries starting. These are elections, of course, to decide who will be the Republican and, on the other side, the Democrat candidates in the November election. They actually start next Monday in Iowa and then New Hampshire the week after. Now, on the Republican side, you've got former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. She's just spent more than $3 million US in advertising in a week, ahead of the $2.3 million spent by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, while Donald Trump's spending just $1.2 million. He's a runaway leader, so I guess he's keeping his cash from later. What does that spending tell you? Because it wasn't that long ago that Nikki Haley didn't have 2 cents to rub together for her campaign. Now, bang, she's got $3 million.
Well, I think donors who the media here has been hyping her up as the alternative to Trump. She definitely has momentum. There's no question about it. As far as the spending goes, the campaigns are spending a bunch of money, as you just noted, but there's also these outside groups, super PACs that are affiliated with the campaigns that can spend at a much higher rate. Trust me when I say that there is not an ad that can be bought in Iowa or New Hampshire that isn't being bought. In Iowa, it's not just the TV advertising. Iowa is what we call a caucus state. People have to show up and cast their vote at a particular time and place in multiple locations throughout Iowa. It's an organizing exercise. And President Trump has really put a lot of time and effort into what we call the ground game, making sure that they identify their voters, that they turn them out, get them to show up to the particular caucus site that they have. This is going to be a really big test. If President Trump wins Iowa by more than 10 or 15 points, I think that's the end of the DeSantis campaign. We move into Iowa, as you said, the next week. And there, if President Trump actually is able to outdo Nikki Haley by the same margin, 10, 15 points, I believe that the race will effectively be over after New Hampshire.
That's be very interesting. Well, I can't wait to talk to you next week about the result in Iowa. That'll be fascinating because I agree, it's going to tell a lot. Sean Spicer, thank you so much indeed for your time.
You bet. Happy New Year.
After the break, Peter Dutton wants tougher laws to ban the kind of Muslim hate preachers that I've been exposing. Plus, how useless is this minister? Why are we paying him? The panel after this. Now, the Pope is politically of the left, global warming and all that, but he's just given a big speech saying surrogacy should be banned worldwide, carrying a baby for someone else. He said it's exploitation and deplorable. Here he is.
Desprecabile la pratica della cosiddetta maternità surrogata che lede gravemente la dignità della donna e del figlio. Essa è fondata sullo sfruttamento di una situazione di necessità materiale della madre.
Now, being a surrogate for money is banned in Australia, but the Pope isn't just against this commercial surrogacy. Joining me is my Tuesday panel, Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture, and Danica Di Giorgio, who you'll also be seeing this year as the host of a new chat show called The Jury, premiering in February. Danica, I'll start with you. Is the Pope right? Ban surrogacy?
No, I personally think, Andrew, it's a completely ridiculous comment by the Pope. In the end, there are a number of reasons why people choose a surrogate if they want to be a parent. And I just think, who am I to judge that as a person? I do not believe in commercial surrogacy whereby you have to pay a surrogate to have the child. I believe that presents a whole different moral issue. But in this day and age, Andrew, to call for a complete ban, I just think it's completely out of touch. And once again, the leftist Pope has just shown himself as being completely out of touch with reality.
That said, Will, there is one other person who's not consulted in a surrogacy, and that's the child. Do you have more sympathy for the Pope?
No, I don't, Andrew. My first tip is that you won't hear me advocate for the ban of anything on your show in 2024. I am sick and tired of the government telling us what we can and cannot do, or being the arbiters of moral authority, as Danica was inferring, as opposed to leaving it to the individual and the family unit. Now, I understand the concerns around exploitation when it comes to surrogacy. That's an argument to regulate it effectively. That's not an argument to ban it. And secondly, to Danica's point, we need to be promoting things that support the growth, the creation of strong family units. And if this enables people who can't otherwise easily have kids to have kids, that's something that we should be endorsing.
Why are we paying this man, Matt Thistlethwaite, and his staff when he's the Minister for the Republic, and our promise is to actually not push it that much after all, given that, you know, the Voice was defeated last year's referendum and they can't hold, don't dare go to another on a Republic. Here he is.
The current method of selecting our head of state is undemocratic. It doesn't represent modern Australian values, and that's something that we want to begin a discussion with Australians on in the longer term. But at the moment, our priority is cost of living relief for Australia. To clarify.
So the Minister for the Republic has got a goal that's been pushed out to the never, never. What is the point of Matt Thistlethwaite, Danica?
Well, that's a wonderful question, Andrew. What is the point? We've got an Assistant Minister for the Republic without a Republic on the agenda, and now that portfolio is seemingly redundant. So why are we paying us taxpayers to have a Republic portfolio when it's not even going to be explored? In fact, it should never, ever have been put there in the first place. Portfolios or ministerial roles, as we know, are for general day-by-day policy decisions that are going to impact Australians' lives, not for promotional purposes, not for a whim and a prayer and a possibility for Labor policy in the future. It's for something that may or may not happen, as the Assistant Minister has said now. I do wonder, though, Andrew, will it make for more cordial arrangements between King Charles and the Prime Minister when he does eventually come to Australia later this year? But I just think I don't understand what the point now is of having this portfolio.
It's so weird, isn't it, Will? Here's an Assistant Minister for an objective that might be, could be all right in the long term if we ever get round to it. Not that I'm going to actually be doing much to actually achieve it. Yet he's got the title and presumably some funding for it. I mean, how does this make sense?
Doesn't make sense, Andrew. There is no point to Matt Thistlewaite, but there's no point to a great many number of government ministers. We, like many Western governments, have dramatically overstepped the ambit of responsibility of the traditional roles of government. Wouldn't it be nice this year, instead of Ministries for Innovation or the Republic or youth or women, we said the government is responsible for ensuring the economy is strong, protecting the borders, making sure defence is all in order, and getting the basics right. I think one of the reasons why we don't do any of that stuff as well as we could is because there isn't that strategic focus. The government thinks they can solve all of our problems, and instead they don't solve any of them particularly effectively.
Well, I hope this question really takes off in the halls of Parliament. What is the point of Matt Thistlewaite? We could run a competition. What is the point of him? Danica, I've been playing sermons by Muslim clerics here, vilifying Jews, often by quoting their religious texts. Here's a couple of examples.
They will cause evil on earth, but there is a Yahudi behind me, come and kill him.
And now Opposition Leader Peter Dutton says he wants tougher laws against this hate speech, Danica, and he even wants funding for Jewish groups wanting to use these laws against Muslim clerics. Is that smart or is it sinister?
No, I think it's completely smart. Why should these Jewish groups be having to fork out money to try and prevent attacks or hate speech against them when really it should be governments and law enforcement authorities that should be doing something in the first place? There's been something like a 750% increase in anti-Semitic abuse in Australia since the Hamas attacks on October 7. What exactly is it going to take for them to stand up and do something about it? And who are we as a nation to be allowing these Jewish groups to be spending so much money to try and protect themselves, to try and feel safe in a country where they should feel safe? If the laws are not working, change them. I think it is a good plan. And if even the scenes we saw, of course, outside of the Sydney Opera House last year, Andrew, if that's not enough to change law enforcement minds about taking action here, then I'm not sure what will.
I don't know. I wonder, Will, the government siding with one group against supposedly another, that it's actually quoting the religious text, much as I hate what that says. That's a recipe for disaster, and you'll get other things added to the list, won't you? You're going to get the government's favourite targets being funded and the ones that aren't won't. What do you make of it?
Yep, I disagree with Danica on this one, and I'm with you, Andrew. Unfortunately, we have a Liberal Party that has completely forgotten what it means to be classically liberal. Free speech is very simple. If you should be allowed to say what you want to say, unless you are inciting violence or unless it is defamatory. Now, some of the things that Muslim clerics are saying may fall in that first bucket, but more generally, we need to recognise that you should not be regulating speech in this way using the law, because ultimately, to your point, it will become a tool of authoritarian regimes as the scope of what is not acceptable to be said gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is going to be the story of the year with misinformation laws, Andrew. We need to have a Liberal Party that can actually stand up for free speech. I'm incredibly concerned that we don't have that strong voice for classical Liberal views around individual freedom when it comes to speech. We need to have people who have the moral courage and who have the intellectual capability to be able to make this argument.
I'd go further and say the problem with this... Go ahead.
Can I just jump in there? I think there's a difference between misinformation but also promoting hate speech. I mean, these clerics were coming out and deliberately calling for Jews to be killed on the streets in Australia. I don't think I think there's a big difference between misinformation and hate speech.
Well, it was hate speech, but they weren't actually calling that. They were quoting the Quran on that point. But my point really is that what we need is actually fewer laws on free speech so that Islam can actually be criticised without fear of being dragged off to a tribunal, losing your job or something like that. That's the real point. We need fewer laws on free speech, not more. And I think that's better a liberal philosophy, in my opinion. Will Kingston, Danica Georgia, love having you on. Thank you so much for your time. That's it from me. Well, coming up next, I don't know what's coming up next, but it is a great documentary. Good night.